Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and it is time for the newest edition of Rapid Fire Reviews, the series where I talk about albums and EPs that I didn't really get a chance to do full coverage of on my channel. Now, I missed out on a lot of EPs throughout the summer and early fall. A lot of that was thanks to the hiatus that I did, so I'm really behind, and I'm basically going to be firing off with everything that I have meant to cover but didn't get a chance to. So yeah, let's just get right into the 18th edition of Rapid Fire Reviews. Analogue is actually one of my favorite artists to come out of Bitbird, mostly just because his piano styling is very different than anything anyone else is really doing on the label, and I didn't think this EP was absolutely anything fantastic, basically just because it's not anything sonically different from what Analogue has given us before, but I guess it's a good summative EP. With this album, at least to me, Jaymes Young has proven himself to be basically at the top of the totem pole when it comes to electronic R&B music, maybe falling a little bit short of Eden, but he's really up there. I enjoyed this album a lot, whether it comes to the lyrics, the production, or the vocals. I think it was very solid in just about every department. My love for Remix Artist Collective in the past really only dated back to his song Cheap Sunglasses with Matthew Koma a few years ago. I actually enjoyed this album a lot more than I thought I would. It's basically just really bright and blissful synth pop music, and if you're into that kind of style, I definitely would suggest you do not miss out on this album. This album is a bit of an interesting one because while I don't like any of the songs on this album as much as Chipland or Rainbow Road or Anything For You, I actually think nanobii did an excellent job kind of showcasing his wide array of production abilities, and in ways that I enjoyed most of them over what he's tried to kind of expand with those in the past. You know, 2017 has really been a year for me in terms of trying to get into more underground styles of dubstep, but regardless of the fairly unique sound design that Code has on this album, I really don't think it's that interesting of an album in the end. Mostly because for me, this style of dubstep gets very tiring after only a few tracks, and sometimes I can take like EPs of this content, but this album is almost 30 tracks long, and it's just impossible for me to get through. This is another album that I personally enjoyed a lot more than I thought I was going to, and I have to say, it is really cool to see Ultra Records putting out music from a future bass artist that's not just putting out your generic run-of-the-mill future bass. He's actually kind of taking things and putting his own unique spin on it, and I really like that about this album. I do have to give Steve Aoki props for this one. Kolony ended up being a lot better than I anticipated, and although I don't feel like Aoki's production on this album is anything super unique or interesting, it is really cool to see him kind of thinking outside the box and doing something different for a change. And in general, I felt like there was a really good selection when it came to his collaborators on this album. He paired a lot of rappers with each other that I felt like had a lot of chemistry with each other, and that made this album at least fairly enjoyable. What this album has going for it, in my opinion, is not a whole lot. I mean, I thought it had a really pretty intro track. I really liked Into the Light a lot, but kind of ironically, I feel like Slushii has kind of lost his identity with this debut album. He's kind of firing off into a number of different directions, and most of those seem to be trying to appeal to more mainstream audiences, audiences of Trap Nation, and just generally EDM radio. I don't feel like this album really had a lot to offer, just my opinion. There were definitely a few shining moments on this album, but in general, it just didn't have as much experimentation as I had hoped for. This EP, you know, it's okay. I definitely wouldn't say I prefer it over Neon Grave or that EP's accompanying remix package, but it ends up being a decent product in the end. I've gotta say though, there's really only one song on this entire EP that hit me in all the places I really needed it to when it comes to the vocals, the production, the sound design, and all that jazz, and that was Young and Dangerous. Ironically, I actually agree with a lot of the points that Dubloadz made in his satirical review of this album. I mean, it does have some decent moments, but it also has some borderline cringeworthy moments, especially on that very first track. This album, to me, is really dry and doesn't have a lot of depth to it. I kind of wish Dubloadz would have expanded past his comfort zone a little more for this album, but it just didn't happen. Now, I like what Valentine did with the concept of this EP by means of making it almost exclusively future bass music, but, you know, Virtual Riot is known as an expert in the field of sound design, and I feel like in that department he really wasn't pushing any boundaries on this EP. This EP, at least to me, is generally a good one, although I feel like each track kind of brings its own unique vibe and atmosphere, making this EP feel a little bit disconnected, but regardless, almost every track on this EP is really good. I would definitely suggest you check this one out. It's funny, a lot of the problems that I had with Temanite's album end up showing up on this album as well, even though Panda Eyes is obviously a completely separate entity from Temanite, except without all the unique flair and character that Temanite had on Inception, so I guess this album just fell a little flat for me. I actually have generally enjoyed what Kaskade has been doing with the more clubby sounding tracks like Sweet Memories, so this EP definitely came as a breath of fresh air for me. I so wish that ATO had more personality as an MC because, you know, Eden's production on projects like this are absolutely killer, and ATO's lyricism isn't that bad either. I think he just needs a little bit more passion in his voice, maybe a little bit more energy, and he can really improve projects like this. I find it kind of funny that the most unique and interesting songs on this album were the interludes between the tracks. Beside that, Rehab has essentially given up the big room style that made him popular in the first place to pursue a much more mainstream and radio-friendly sound, and I just don't think it played out in the end. On his debut album, OVERWERK seems to be caught between a few different styles of house music and doesn't really know what direction he wants to take. In the end, I think it ends up falling fairly flat. I've seen 100 different albums do this in the past with more diversity and more creativity. This definitely wasn't a sound that he should have completely retracted himself from Monstercat with. You know, it's not that special. And that's not to say that this album is bad, it's just decent. When Lecrae released a single with Ty Dolla $ign, I have to say I was very skeptical of it, but I ended up being very surprised at how well Lecrae pulls together a more modern sound on All Things Work Together, kind of taking more influence from the trap genre. And even if this isn't my favorite project that he's done to date, you know, Lecrae does what he does best in terms of his lyricism, and he does it with a very relevant sound, so this album ended up shaping out pretty well. This album definitely didn't interest me or hit me as hard as Oxygen. I guess I do like that it's more adaptable to a live performance, which is kind of the direction that Fred V and Grafix are going for, but I wouldn't say I preferred this over their last project by far. Now, with this album, it was made especially evident to me that I prefer Robin Schulz's remixes light years above his originals. It's really cool to me to see Robin Schulz taking songs like To You by David Guetta, I Hate You, I Love You by Nash, Prayer and Sea by Lilywood and the Prick, kind of take those songs and transform them from their original styles into a more clubby sound. But when it comes to him putting out full-length albums, we really do not get a whole lot that's more in-depth than just a simple house beat with like kind of a lighthearted guitar and some vocals. He hasn't really offered anything with this album that he didn't do from his last one or the one before that, and I'm just really not so interested. In regards to this album, I had thought, you know, if there's one music producer who can make a solid house album all the way through, it's going to be AC Slater. Nope. Just nope. I mean, I can listen to any of these songs individually without much problem, but trying to listen to all of this as a full-length album is just hard. I can't do it. And that's about it for today's edition of Rapid Fire Reviews. Like I had mentioned, I really wanted to cover a lot of these albums in full-length videos, but there's a lot of really new, exciting stuff coming out soon that I want to cover in full-length videos, and I want to make sure the new and fresh stuff comes out in priority. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you later. Peace. Wow, 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 wow.